All right, this video recording is the content for chapter 3, which is recording the crime scene. I'll break it up into two sections. So this recording will be about taking notes and making sketches at the crime scene. And then I'll make a second video about photography and video documentation. Also, I'm going to try to link the videos to this page of the slideshow presentation. So for easy access, if you want to look at the videos. The purpose of recording the crime scene is to memorialize the crime scene using photography, accurate and specific measuring, sketching, and diagramming, and also including handwritten notes for details and a final detailed report. Now, the timing of all these actions or activities are all different and it makes each one very important. These images are of a crime scene and an unrelated diagram, so those two don't match up. Crime scene notes are super important and are first taken during the initial walkthrough of the crime scene by the lead investigator. This should be done before the scene is sketched, photographed, or searched so that the notes are based on the original crime scene condition. Once the lead investigator walks through the crime scene and takes notes, then that person can assign the tasks that need to be accomplished in order to further investigate the crime scene. So, crime scene notes, like I said, are taken by or for the lead investigator. And it begins when the investigator is requested to report to the crime scene. So the lead investigator writes down who contacted them, what time were they notified, and date, of course. Preliminary case information such as who, what, where, and when the crime scene happened. Personnel present on arrival and those being contacted. So who was there when you got there and who do you plan on contacting? Those are some of the main things that you need to record. And here's an example. The notes are taken or contain a personal log of all observations made by the investigator and the time the observations were made. They're taken in a uniform layout concurrently as the observations are made. So you have to write stuff down as you're seeing it. You cannot go back to your office at the end of your, time there and then write your notes. You have to write it like in real time. The notes are written in a bound notebook in blue or black ink as opposed to individual sheets of paper, just kind of floating sheets of paper. So they have to be in a bound notebook. Why do you think the notes need to be entered into a bound notebook? So I can tell you this. Uh, when I was working at GE in the research department, we had to take our lab notes in a bound notebook. And one of the reasons is so that you can prove that it was your idea at this date and time. Like you don't like slip in a sheet later on, right? And so I think the same reasoning is for crime scene notes is that, you could tell the chronology of when things happened and you can't like slip in pages after the fact. Investigators may also choose or may instead choose to record crime scene notes on audio tapes, but the officers have to be very careful about what is being said, including what others say in the background. Nothing can be deleted from the audio recording, um, which is like throwing away original notes. And importantly, all crime scene notes, that is paper handwritten notes, as well as recording devices, are subpoenaed, can be subpoenaed at the trial. So when you're writing your handwritten notes or making an audio recording, you really have to be careful about, what you're writing as far as appropriateness or what's around you if you're audio recording it. So the notes are critical to permanently record the scene in its original condition. First contact You identify who contacted the investigator, the time, and any preliminary information that was given you, as well as the case number. You must keep precise records of personal movements and tasks assigned and the beginning and ending times of those tasks. And the notes need to be written in ink, written in a bound notebook at the time of the investigation and not from memory later. So that's kind of the summary of your note taking. Evidence notes, specific like subset of notes, are taken around the evidence, especially making a note of if the evidence is disturbed by emergency personnel or others. So you arrive to the crime scene and you know things have been moved because they're trying to save someone's life. You fully describe all evidence before they are collected. So whoever collects the evidence must write down and describe each piece of evidence. For the collection of evidence, you have to record who found the evidence, where it was located, how it was packaged, and by whom, and when it was packaged. For a homicide with a victim present, the state of the body as found should be written, the appearance and position of the body, wounds, blood splatter, identifying features or marks. Objects found on the body, such as wallet or jewelry, are also recorded. Now, these are your notes, right? And you're going to, with the notes, the photographer will come and take pictures of them, etc. But this will be handwritten descriptions. Very similar to, like, if you do a lab or something, you include the picture of your lab, but you also need to describe it in writing, what you're seeing. Audio recording of notes at the scene can be advantageous due to time because, it takes time to write stuff down. Care must be taken to avoid embarrassing conversation. Narrating a digital video is also acceptable. Audio and video recording of notes must be transcribed into writing. So everything has to be transcribed into writing. Right. So that is the end of note taking. Very, very important. The next section I want to talk about is sketching the crime scene, which is also very critical. And so there's a process for sketching the crime scene. First, you do a rough sketch, and then you do the finished sketch. And I think somebody asked me in the need to know if you have to, you can use CAD. And yes, for the finished sketch, you can. But obviously, for the rough sketch, there's no time to like sit there and use CAD. So for the rough sketch, this is actually quite a nice rough sketch. Obviously, it was done by someone who's done this a lot. But you notice that the lines are, hand drawn and they're not like perfectly straight. You could tell that this was probably done like, by a person with a piece of paper on a clipboard or something and just kind of hand drew everything in. You can use graph paper if that helps you like keep your lines kind of straight and stuff like that. But yeah, so again, it's just a rough sketch. But the important thing is that it clearly shows the layout of the crime scene, right? That it shows significant items and features like windows, doors, um, like where the like beds are, big furniture, larger furniture items. Obviously, it shows some of the key evidence like a broken vase, a bloody handprint, broken window, footprints. Obviously, the body. This particular one must be a murder. Here's some directionals. Like in this direction is the kitchen and living room, right? It definitely should also include any of the objects that were photographed. The measurements and topography, the measurements need to be there and accurate. Definitely needs to show entry and exit points, including those that might have been done by the perpetrator, right? Obviously, here's an exit point from the perpetrator. It should consider witness stories and descriptions and clearly show the relationships in space and the location of the collected evidence. So you can see all that here. You'll start with your rough sketch, which is an accurate depiction of the dimensions of the scene. So you're going to write the dimensions of the scene, even if your lines and it might not be perfectly to scale, right? Locate all objects having a bearing on the case and also some key features in the room, even if it does or doesn't have bearing on the case, in order to give you your spatial like orientation. So you should definitely have a paper, couple of measuring tapes, clipboard or drawing surface, pencils, and a compass or GPS device is helpful. So the rough sketch should include, and the final sketch, so all sketches have to include a title block, which includes the case number, the name and title of the person making the sketch, the location of the scene, the date and time it was created. A legend needs to be included with a key to identify um, all of the objects. Like if you use a symbol for different things, they should be identified in the key, and the dimensions of the object should be included also. Um, a compass is helpful to have and needs to be on your rough sketch so you know which direction is north, right? So you can just put a little, like you've seen on maps, a little compass on there. Oh, I didn't put a picture in that. So there's a process to creating the rough sketch. So first you need to define your boundaries, and those can be, if it's in a room, it might be the walls. If it's outside, it might be fence or roads or something like that. Establish known points from which to measure locations. You'll draw your boundaries first and record the boundary dimensions. Then, using one of the three measurement methods, you will measure out the key features in your crime scene and write them on your rough sketch. The distances on the sketch must be accurate, not estimates, like I said before. Evidence is typically assigned a number, and frankly, the key features are often assigned a letter, but you should definitely have your numbering and lettering system, already arranged, and should be identified in the sketch. So any of the evidence that's in the sketch, you should number. Final sketch is redrawn afterwards, and it has to be drawn to scale from the rough sketch. So your rough sketch obviously may not be to scale, even though you'll write the distances on there so that later you can recreate it to scale. Okay, so measurement methods. There are the rectangular method, the triangulation method, linear station line method, and GPS method. So here's an example of in cold blood crime scene in Holcomb, Kansas. This outside scene here, and then the indoor scene here. So you would have to make a sketch of both. And what methods would you use? Different methods for each one. All right. So what are the methods? The rectangular method is often used by just one person, and you use the X, Y, and even Z axis coordinates. So X and Y are obviously, Y and X, and the Z would be if it's up, higher, or lower, right? You'll select two walls for distance measurements. You'll measure in right angles and record the dimensions of large objects. So, for an example, they chose this wall, the left wall, and the bottom wall, which is not actually written on here. Maybe I missed that. But and then so the bed is 4.5 feet or 4 feet 5 inches from the left wall and 9 feet 5 inches from the bottom wall. The dead person here is 2 feet 8 inches from the left wall and 6 foot 3 inches from the bottom wall. And this desk over here is 12 feet 5 inches from the left and 1 foot 2 inches from the bottom. So you could see that you're using the same two walls, and all of these are right angles, or should be. Okay, that's the rectangular method. The triangulation method needs two people really to do it and requires two fixed positions. And you measure from the fixed location to the object. And it's good for oddly shaped rooms. This one happens to be rectangular, but if it weren't rectangular, how can you measure from two like perpendicular walls, right? You may insert stakes into the ground to form two fixed positions also. So if you're outside. So how is this one done? Something like this. So if it is in a room, by the way, they often choose like the corners of the room as the two fixed positions. So in this drawing, this corner and this corner of the walls, you have to pretend there's a wall here again. I don't know what happened to it. Are the fixed positions, right? And then they will draw from this point to the gun and vice versa, the same points to the person, the same points to the bed, the same points to the desk. And then you have to measure all the distances And so based on this, you would be able to accurately place all of the objects in the room, key objects in the room. The station or baseline method, line method is is typically used when there's kind of like a long, narrow pathway. Um, in the book, it said it's often used outdoors, but also you can use it for hallways. Very, very good to use for that. And in order to do this, you locate two fixed objects on opposite sides of the scene. So in a hallway, you choose like one end of the hallway and like the other end of the hallway, likely. The distance along the line and to the left or right is noted, and it's good for long, narrow corridors. And if this corridor is really narrow, right, you don't have to write down the distance left to right. Unless it's a smaller object like this, then you want to definitely note that. You see this little gun over here. And you measure the distance from one end of the hallway. Okay, so give you an example. Here's my hallway. There's my dead body and the gun. And so I'm going to obviously use this far end as my 0 point, and 4.4 feet 4 inches from the wall is the dead body, and then 11 feet 6 inches from the wall is the gun. Now, it's very important that you always use the same point for your measurements. You don't want to do 4.4 feet 4 inches from that wall and then like 5 inches from this wall or whatever it is. You have to always use the same wall for your measurements. If the gun were skewed to the side like in the picture, I would probably also include, like from the center line here, um, 6 inches to the left or whatever it is. But if the corridor is very narrow and it doesn't matter, then you don't have to do that. The last method, which wasn't listed in the top 3, is a GPS labeling method. It's, relatively newer, and it's great for large areas, like large areas when there's no fixed points, if it's like on the water, large fields, parking lot. Parking lot, you might have some fixed points, but still larger areas. It's bad if there are many pieces of evidence and bad for indoor use because, GPS is not that precise, right? Can't go down to like the inch. So here is a crime scene that happened near the Appalachian Trail. So there was a shallow grave here. This is a creek, right? So you can tell it's a pretty large area. Shallow grave here, some victims' clothing here, and a shovel was found over here. They're pretty far apart. You notice there's a compass in the rough drawing here, and they have the GPS coordinates, right? Um, Oftentimes, devices like cameras nowadays have a GPS coordinate. So if you're taking photographs of your evidence, say outside, and you have the GPS on, it will automatically track your location, which is great. All right. So that's it for the note taking and sketching section. So here's a little quiz for you. How would you measure evidence in this room? You can pause the video if you need to think for a second. If you chose triangulation method, because look at this room is clearly not rectangular, you would be correct. And in this particular case, they chose those two pillars and drew their lines from each of the pillars, and then you would measure the distance from this pillar and this pillar to the gun, and this pillar and that pillar to the person. Right. What's next? How would you measure evidence in this room? This one's pretty straightforward. Obviously, you'd use the straight line method, and you'd have to pick a point or an end and then measure from that side. Okay, that's it. And be ready for the next video.